Hey,
Hi.
welcome to What Could Go Wrong live episode something.
Yeah.
Actually, I have no
7,
idea.
8, something like that.
It's somewhere between 7 and 11. I feel like
Yeah.
it's a good range.
It's a nice reference there, 7-Eleven.
Yes. Look at me. Today I'm hanging out with Dustin, Poly Innovator, who I met through his Polycast. Excuse
There you
me. Sorry, I've gotten it wrong before.
go.
And we got to chat, and that was like, when was that? When
It
did
was a while
we meet?
back. Well, we met on Matchmaker.fm, which is how I started talking to a lot of people on the show. And I
Yeah,
think we started talking back in October, November, maybe even
yeah,
sooner than that, or like earlier than
yeah,
that.
something like that. So last year, sometime we started chatting, and then we went on your show and talked about poly innovators in education, 21st century education, all that type of stuff. And that was way before any of my things existed, and now my things exist. And I'm like, ooh, Dustin needs to come hang out and do talk about this more. So
For sure.
um, you probably can introduce yourself better. So please go for it.
Well, thank you. I'm Dustin Miller, Poly Innovator. I'm an omni content creator and also host of the Polymath podcast, as she was saying there, where I talk to people who are multidisciplinary. And in this journey that I've been working on, I've been trying to change how we approach education in the modern sense, especially since there's a lot of polymaths out there, or people who are polymathic at least, who want to learn, but they feel confined by traditional schooling.
So, what is polymathy?
A polymath is someone with many learnings, often in a deep level. So they're taking the jack of all trades approach of doing a lot of different things. But a polymath, the difference is they have a deep level of knowledge in those areas, and they have often a trans-contextual thinking between those areas as well.
Okay, so you're a polymath, yes.
I would not say so. I say I'm an aspiring polymath
Ah,
because to say a polymath, someone is a polymath, it's a very kind of high ranking kind of thing. Where not high ranking, I guess that's the best way to put it. It's one of those things where you've spent a
you
long
get like
time
a
doing
gold
something.
star, like
Yeah, you get
a.
a legal start. Like Leonardo da Vinci is like a true polymath, but he was like a master in many different areas. You don't have to be a master at your skill sets to be a polymath, I don't think. But there is a level of deep level of knowledge, and I'm only in fitness and maybe content marketing are the only areas. I'm more of a bimath at this point. I'm still on my way. That's my point I want to
So
make.
if you get one more, are you
Yeah,
then?
I would
Just need
say three or
one
more.
more.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of awesome researchers actually talking about like what defines a polymath. What are the things, especially in the academic world too? Like what are the things that actually make someone a polymath?
And what have they said about that? Like, I'm interested now to hear.
Yeah, so like Michael Araki is one. He talks about this difference between creative polymathy, someone who's doing something with their knowledge, and more passive. So kind of like
Mm,
a dilettante, someone who's just learning for the
mm-hmm.
sake of learning. And there's also the Bernsteins. They both have been talking about deep research, and I haven't read the research too much, and so I want to make sure I don't. I want to do it justice, but essentially speaking, they're all talking about the different levels of how someone might be a polymath over time. And I think that's a very interesting thing, where it's kind of a lifelong journey in a way.
Oh yeah. I mean, so are you familiar with the 10,000 hours concept? Right, it takes
Mhm.
10,000. So what is that? How does that compare? The 10,000 hours. If you do 10,000 hours into something, or can you add that to your
Yeah.
polymathy bag?
So the 10,000 hours has been proven to kind of be sort of true. Like it's definitely true. If you do 10,000 hours, you're going to get good at it. But there's this idea of deliberate practice versus just passive practice. And Malcolm Gladwell, who is the one that really kind of made it popular, the concept, he talked with someone who became his friend named David Epstein. Epstein wrote a book called Range, which is a great polymathic or generalist book out there. And so I'm going to pull from him a little bit. And there's this idea behind like you could be a master at something from 8,000 hours, but maybe for you it also could take 12,000 hours. Not you in particular, but in general,
I
8 to
got
12.
that. It's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine.
And so it's interesting to think about that different areas of your life could take less time to become a master at, or more time, depending on how difficult it is, how well you're practicing, how much time you can allocate to it. And so the idea of mastery is very fluid, where there's a lot of different levels to it, and there's a lot of different ways of becoming a master at something. And sometimes you can actually accelerate your knowledge by mixing together knowledge from other areas, which is how a lot of polymaths think. They may be a specialist in one area and becoming one in others, but they can use that specialty to try to, what's the word, translate the knowledge into something else. So if I'm
Mm,
a master at swimming, which I've taught swimming for nearly a decade now, I can take the concepts of that and find a way to translate it into other areas of knowledge. And that could help accelerate that 10,000 hours.
I like that. I mean, so you're saying there's variables in how you
Mhm.
acquire knowledge. We're not just robots who acquire in one
Yeah,
specific manner.
or
I
cogs
am
in a wheel.
shocked. I am shocked by what you're saying. So every time I talk to you, I feel like I learn something new. I mean, you
Awesome.
store all of this information just like how do you keep it in there? I don't understand. When you learn a lot
Great
and
question.
then you retain it and then you regurgitate it, and sometimes I miss the retain and regurgitate part.
Mhm. Well, it's a great compliment, so thank you. It's very interesting to think about is that I'm a perfectionist by nature too. And so I'm thinking I'm not doing good enough at remembering things.
Yeah,
But I
yeah, yeah.
forget the perspective that if someone else is having a harder time at it, they might not be remembering things very well either. And so there's a lot of things that comes down to systems too. So I'm looking at Notion right now at our old episode to make sure that if there's a piece of information that we talked about on my show, I can bring it back. So there's a matter of tools helping you out as well.
Mm-hmm.
As they say in Silicon Valley, a second brain, if you will.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that way, if you want to brain dump and get information off, you no longer have to keep it in the
Oh,
prefrontal cortex and
I
short
have
term.
that. I have
Yeah,
second or third, fourth slash seventh. It's fine.
type brain. Well, and it's interesting too because the idea of permanency or keeping the ideas in place. And I love what Afonso was saying there is being curious and open to learning and like really indulging your curiosity. And I think that's one actually good way to answer your question too, Chelsea, is that if you are polymathic, you're indulging in your curiosity a lot. And since you are interested in what you're learning, you're more likely to remember it in the first place.
That's true. Because if you give me information about, I mean, if you want to sit here and talk about education, I could probably rattle off all types of things for you.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about something else, I may not retain it. So, like Alfonso is saying, cultivate multiple passions and interests. Don't worry about being perfect. Hey, Dustin, reject gatekeepers and set realistic goals. I think all of those are true.
Yeah.
I mean, for most things, especially for something like this.
Well, and there is a lot of gatekeepers out there, especially when it comes to polymathy, but even in other areas of knowledge too, when it comes to education, such as like getting the degree. And nowadays we're seeing a lot more people of my generation or even the Gen Z generation talking about how maybe we don't need a degree in this case for some jobs. Some might, you might not. This depends.
Oh, yeah, and that's a whole other rabbit
Topic.
trail
Yeah. Yeah.
of degree conversations, right? But I think what we want to focus on for this show, what you and I decided is kind of why are you polymathic then?
Polymathic, yeah.
Okay, then why
Yeah.
polymathic people are not allowed in education, why it becomes
Mm.
so challenging. And so I have some theories, but then I have two questions for you to start with. Why aren't they, and by allowed, right? Why don't they excel? Why aren't they kind of given the tools they need to think the way they think? And two,
Mhm.
can you be a polymath and still be in, K-12, because we're talking deep learning, right? So where
Mhm.
does that kind of fall? So ready, set, go.
I would put the K-12 off to the side for now because that's a whole other rabbit hole that we'll definitely go into. But when it comes to polymaths in education, whether you're the student or the teacher, it is a lot more common, I think you might think. And on top of that, too, there is a big, large rise in the amount of liberal arts degrees out there, these interdisciplinary degrees, because people want to be more generalists. They want to be more polymathic because that's what their interests lie. And I think it's a much more natural state that people realize too. And ever since the Industrial Revolution, the second one at least, we've had this idea of being specialists. It's been burned into us where we have to get one skill, one job, one career, and be the
Mm-hmm.
cog in the wheel, so to speak, for the factory. And as the decades rolled on, that cog in the wheel expanded. You had more responsibilities, you had more things to do, you had more things to learn. And now we're seeing, especially with the internet too, there's a lot of changes in that remote work, people doing many different roles in one. The company's looking for that unicorn employee, so to speak.
Yeah.
And ironically, they're looking for generalists. They're looking for polymaths. And this
Mm-hmm.
idea that we need to be a specialist is still ingrained in education, especially where you're like, you need to pick one degree, maybe
Right.
get a dual major, but even then you're still focusing on one mainly, and then get that piece of paper and work in that career. But there is this kind of dissonance between what you're actually doing with that knowledge and what you're learning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm so excited to kind of see this concept of one thing that you're going to do for the rest of your life, and you have to know it by the time you're 18 and you're never going to do anything else, being like ripped apart ferociously.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely a part of that crowd because that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I didn't get my degree until 10 years after I was doing the job that I was already doing. And then I went back and got the degree for the job that I was doing. And the only reason I did it was because I had to have it for an accreditation, something and something we were doing for the school. So I went backwards.
Yeah.
But it gave me the opportunity to do all kinds of, I mean, I was always been in education, but my degree ended up being in child development, and I was doing um, administration and leadership and those types of things. And so it wouldn't have made sense. I couldn't have applied for the job that I had with
Yeah.
the degree that I got.
Right.
Or
It's interesting
something
too.
like that.
That's a common occurrence for a lot of polymathic people. One of the persons I like online is Gary Vee, and he talks about
Yeah.
he's the CEO of a major company, and he's also built up a lot of other businesses as well. And one thing that always gets me is that if he were to apply to his company, he wouldn't be able to get any of the jobs. Just
Totally.
like on paper, he would not be fit for that role, but he's running the company effectively
Mm-hmm.
too, no less.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a matter of, especially C-level. I think a lot of the ideas going about like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they're really smart, but they weren't always the great students, from what I have been told. And it's interesting how they, like, the C-level people in school are the C-level executives, but the people who get A's are the ones working for the C's, so to speak.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. So, for example, my brother is he's a unicorn. They actually call him that at his work, and they are now looking for more unicorns to come and work because they found him. He came in and did this role that wasn't even real and didn't even exist and just made it magical, right? And then he got promoted, and now they can't fill this role that was created because they can't find any more unicorns. And so I
Right.
agree that that's a hard thing to do, to find someone who can do just all these different pieces instead of just a very specific thing. And I wonder, is that because we're trained to work specific, or is it because, I mean, everybody has different strengths, but do you think we would have more generalists or people who could be a unicorn if maybe this was ingrained into our education system, that we can explore and be curious and do more than one thing?
For sure. I think by far, if we had a more open system of learning, we would. My best learning experience in high school was when I went to the library and burned through the philosophy section in a matter of a few months. And I just voraciously read all the books I could get my hands on. That was my best learning experience in high school. And it was a self education thing because that was the only way I would be able to get that education, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that if we had a more freedom of sorts, hail to all the unicorns, yes. It's interesting too because when it comes to education as well, even in K through 12, there is this interesting things happening across the globe. So I was talking to someone on my show about European schools and how they want you to work on focusing on one area back in high school. Whereas here in the US, we focus more on college level. And so you pick a degree, not degree, but like pick an area of interest that you want to work in high school. But the cool thing is there's this idea of looking at that specialty from another perspective. So if you want to go into lawmaking, then you look at the biology behind not biology, but like maybe the chemistry behind lawmaking or something like that, or the lawmaking behind chemistry, back and forth. You look at one area of knowledge from a different point of view, from a different area, like chemistry to philosophy or philosophy to science. And that way you get a more transcontextual thinking from that. And in China, for example, in some of the elementary schools, they make these kids do music, sports, and then mathematics, and sometimes esports, and all these different skills. So these students are getting a more polymathic education than we are in the US, for example.
Yeah, I mean, they're not siloing it out. They're understanding that's all. And so that's very anti-traditional education in America. And I'm gonna just maybe lose some friends, maybe not here, maybe not friends that are here currently, but maybe some friends who may watch it later, that
Yeah.
my daughters do not take math or science or English. They take classes that allow them to work in all kinds of ways. So, for example, my oldest takes a junior entrepreneurship class where they have to write job proposals and they have to, figure out their budgets and and do all these different things. And hint, hint, that's like English and math and, and all those types of things. But she does not take a math class that's just specific. Everything is dependent upon the other. And when her VR class comes together, they do that kind of thing. And so the school that she's at, there's actually no math class. Everything they have a Minecraft club and
Is
they
it out
build video
school
games.
or?
It's called Galileo.
Galileo. Okay.
But we use OutSchool as well to kind of supplement with some other things. Like she takes guitar and all that stuff on OutSchool, but we don't take math classes. And if I start the conversation that way, people are like, "You're doing what to your child now? I thought you were an educator."
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. I remember when you were on my show, you mentioned how you were at the park and one of your girls was like making a chart with rocks and sticks or something like that, and
Yeah.
charting out I think an animal or something like that. How many times they can
Uh-huh.
count a turtle or something like
Yep.
that. I think.
Sounds right.
It's
That sounds like
yeah.
our life. I mean, in early education, it's well understood that everything is interdisciplinary, right? There's
Mhm.
nothing siloed. So we know, and why suddenly you go from early education into K-12 and the expectations shift over a 2-month summer, I will never understand. But
Yeah.
inside of early education, we know that everything's interdisciplinary. And so we know that if we're stacking rocks, we're working on fine motor. We're working on gross motor, if depending on how big the rocks are.
Yeah.
We've done like the big ones with the styrofoam rocks, right? We're working on math. If we're talking about counting, we could put them in alphabet order. I mean, the possibilities for engagement, and we always say the activity is the relationship, is the container for relationship. And so as long as you're talking and working with them inside of whatever activity you're doing, it can be multidisciplinary. There's no need that
Mhm.
it needs to be just one thing. That's a different rabbit trail. Yes,
Yeah.
boulders, Jackie, would definitely
Oh,
be
there's
gross motor. I would like I would like to see
PE class right there. Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of swimming. So when I teach swimming, I have to take a very interdisciplinary approach to it because there's physical, there's mental. I talk about the 3 P's of swimming. So psychology, physics, and philosophy. And you need all three in order to get that done. So like you're saying about different rocks, there's different ways of going about it. And what you're doing with those rocks are different kinds of learning. When someone's trying to learn to swim, well, you have to learn the physical movements. That's often one of the first things. But sometimes even before that, it's a mental game. Some people don't want to put their face underwater. And if you don't have that face underwater, your neck is sticking out, you're causing all kinds of physical disruptions that prevent you from swimming. So sometimes it's the mental game, the psychology. Sometimes it's fitness and the physics
Mm-hmm.
as the water, the hydrodynamics. Other times it's philosophy. Why do we do the things in the water? Why do we do it this way? And so it's a very interdisciplinary way of thinking too, where you have to approach from different angles. Every single student is different. Every student I had to change my tack, like if you will,
Yeah.
tactics to get
Yeah.
them to learn it.
Definitely. And on that note, like my youngest gets overwhelmed with school. We call her a secret learner, right? Because
Mhm.
in a traditional school setting, if you put a worksheet in front of her or something like that, she'll just shut down and be
Mm.
like, nope. And
Yeah.
so when they're trying to assess her in this manner, she's assessing at, way below grade level or all these things that they do. And so they're giving her tools that she doesn't need. And for
Mhm.
her, it's not the academic portion. It's she gets overwhelmed with this and then just shuts down and goes on. It's psychological for her. I mean, so we talk about all the time, if you don't have psychological safety, you're not going to move anywhere. You have to have that as the baseline for everything that you're doing. And like you were saying with swimming, if you're scared of putting your face under the water, everything else is going to become really hard,
Yeah.
really quickly.
If anything, like not really possible. I've seen a lot of swimmers swim with their head out of the water, and thank you, Jackie, too, by the way. I've seen people swim out of the water, but when you look at their spine and how it's just rotated and not being in a good position, it makes me cringe. I'm like, okay, we got to fix that. And it's
Yeah.
interesting too. You mentioned like how your daughter learns. It makes me think of like Maslow hierarchy of needs, but in a way of like hierarchy of learning, so to speak. If
Right.
the
Yep.
person is not ready to go, they're not going to learn. Once they get ready to learn, then they need to know what to learn. Once they know what to
Mm-hmm.
learn, they need to learn how to learn.
Yeah.
And then you know why you learn it, that kind of thing. And so it's kind of Simon Sinek start with why, but in reverse. Sometimes you have to go the opposite way too. Why are we learning this? So I'm actually interested in learning. So sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
have to start from the bottom, sometimes you have to start from the top, and every student's different. You have to figure out as an educator which way you need to go about it.
Oh, definitely. Inside the education, the larger public education system, that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily exist because,
Yeah.
they're having to do it from top down instead of bottom up. And that can be really challenging because if they asked every single student what they wanted to learn and how they wanted to learn it, they would have to restructure the whole system
Yeah.
and have different qualifications. But just having that relationship with the child or with the learner is kind of the huge thing. And so I think that's just the relationship of all of it is huge.
Mhm. Well, I think you're right too, and like there's this dissonance on like how the schooling is being happened, and I would argue that it's not happening from the what or why; it's happening from the how. Schools are
Right.
looking at the how first. This is how you learn it, and that's all they care about. Like, this is how. Like, you have to follow that logical set of instructions. But as we know,
Yeah.
not everything's logical. Back when I was a kid, I had a weird aversion to paper. The sensation made me just cringe. It was almost like a phobia in a way, which I don't think I've ever said on air. So that's lucky for you. But
Oh, really? We get the
special.
special information.
Yeah.
It was like a sensory processing issue.
It was like it
Yeah.
bugged the hell out of me, basically, as I would say. And the thing was, I didn't do my homework a lot of the time because of that. Plus, I also didn't feel like doing homework in the first place. Again, for me, it was against my own lifestyle. Like, school,
Yeah.
I had that bucket for school, I had the bucket for home. I didn't want them to mix.
Yeah.
And so between the sensory sensation and the mindset on homework, I never did my homework. And so as an academic, my grades weren't very great. But when I was in school, I would learn things well and actually apply myself. But because so much of the grade is around homework and how all these different things coming together, the grades weren't always the greatest.
Yeah, and that's not not common.
Yeah, not uncommon, I guess.
There you go. Thank you. See, I always learn something from you. Your ability to speak in complete sentences when mine gets like, meh.
I'll help your
So
brain.
thank you so much. You are really good for that. And I think, we're kind of you were a rebel educator hanging out with me before you even knew you were a rebel educator. We were friends,
Yeah.
right? Like we were
Yeah.
friends before we were friends. And, we do that when my daughter was in a traditional school. I told her teachers, like, listen, she's there for 8 hours. She's here and awake for, 2.5. So whatever she doesn't finish at school, she can finish the next day, or it's not relevant. You can't
Yeah.
have the time that we're here. And they did not care for that. And that was kind of a struggle, but it was kind of the same thing. Like, hey, you have 8 hours. If you can't
Yeah.
finish what you need to do in 8 hours, then there's a different problem and I'll help you solve it.
Well, and there's a matter of personalization too. Like you said that we can't do that, but it's interesting how with technology we can. There's a school in Singapore, I don't remember the name, where they're using AI to judge or like calculate what a kid knows. And so analyzing how well that student knows that area and basically adjust their curriculum on that analysis. And so it's a very
Oh, that's
yeah, yeah.
fantastic.
So that's
And
that's
I
all the
think
point I have there.
Alfonso
Like I
would
think it's
like
just
that.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, like Alfonso would love that because we had that conversation last night, but I think there's so many possibilities because the concept of emergent curriculum, right? A curriculum that changes depending upon the learner is hard. I mean,
Yeah.
we had an emergent curriculum at the school that I ran, and our ratios were like 6-1, right? So we have low ratios as compared to most schools. And even then, imagine one teacher trying to ensure an emergent curriculum all day, every day for 6 learners. I mean, that's hard with 6 learners, but if you take that and you try to scale it out, then that's a whole nother issue. I mean, just finding the consistency to create an emergent curriculum for this wide range of learners.
One could even say it might be impossible too, because it's one of those things where, especially as you scale it up, but even on a small scale, the level of pathways it could take is so exponential that it could make it hard for even just 3 students, let alone 6, let alone 9. And so there's a level of tagging and information architecture behind it. I think that with a good system in place, like what I'm trying to do with the modular degree, that kind of thing,
Right.
some kind of system that can actually expand upon it, I think it's interesting too. Because there's a really cool website called Class Central, which basically is a catalog for every online course. And the guy who made it was super interested. He's super amazing, Dawal Shah. And it's interesting how there's so many courses on there. And I actually talked to him about the whole idea of information architecture. How do you categorize and tag and group up all these different areas of knowledge and courses? That's only one thing of learning too. There's podcasts, there's videos, there's books and audiobooks and articles, all these different learning mediums online. And a lot of people are ignoring those and focusing purely on courses and MOOCs, but they're all come together. A lot of my knowledge for social media marketing came from articles, for Pete's sake.
Totally.
And it's just interesting, like, we need to be able to find a way to unite them all.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think taking this concept of structuring that information into the assessment world would be very cool. But the biggest struggle I think we hit in that concept is how we're getting the information, we're assessing the children, because if it's still the learners, because if it still consists of sitting them in front of a piece of paper and telling them to fill out the Scantron, right? We still have a problem. So even if we get the information and are able to use it to create some sort of emergent curriculum, which would be fantastic. Getting the information from the child is still I think the hardest part, because it has to be observational. I mean, it needs to be
Proof.
dynamic and like following them through what they're doing. And I think
Yeah.
that can be really hard to automate.
Well, maybe automation, but I think that this is where you don't really need automation as much, because I've been thinking about that, because it's also a matter of accreditation too. How do you know students doing it? How do you know
Right.
what particular educational materials are worth it? And I was thinking about that for my own endeavors too. Like, how do I prove I know this knowledge? How do I prove that anyone who does a modular degree knows knowledge? And so I thought of it as kind of like self-branding. A lot of different endeavors now, like Praxis or My MBA, these new endeavors that are coming out to give an alternative to college, so to speak. It's interesting how the way they're going about it is blogging. Like, you make a blog post for every course that you take, and you start making an output. So you asked
Right.
me at the very beginning, how do I remember so many different things? Well, I remember a lot about social media marketing because I made blog posts about it. I started talking to people on shows about it. And the more I was able to refine my knowledge by speaking about it, I was able to refine it mentally as well. And so it's kind of like the Feynman technique of breaking things down
Right.
more and more simply. And by doing that, it made it more concrete in my brain as well. And I think that by doing it with content or doing some sort of output, even if it's a bullet journal, it's private and only you and the instructor can see it, that is something that could be a way of outputting as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's kind of, we had talked before about the concept of digital badges, right? And
Yeah.
being able to kind of gather those as you go and show what you've learned along the way. And getting this assessment of learning in the process of learning, rather than learning and then coming back, a couple months later and trying to assess it, rather assessing and learning at the same time so that you can keep going in a dynamic way, I think is the most important thing, because I don't know. It's, again, we go back to, it's all interdisciplinary. It's all mushed together. You can't take learning and assessment apart. But that's
Yeah.
my own nerdy brain and thoughts on
Well,
that.
I think it's interesting because I never really thought too much on an assessment aspect. My interest was purely on acquisition of knowledge and actually
Uh-huh.
gaining it all together, almost like a dilettante. But I've tried to do something personally with my own output. But I think that's an interesting thing. Like, there's a level of output, but also refining and knowing how well you know something, and that middle ground, so to speak, between the
Yeah.
output and input. And what do we do with that middle ground?
Yeah. Jackie says,
Yeah.
I found that some of the online assessments evaluations have instructions that don't seem to be matched to grade level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I would agree with that. And it does definitely make it harder. And Alfonso says, yeah, I'm a fan of badges and micro credentials. I have over 100 badges, certifications, and micro credentials. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that too. I mean, so my daughter's school, they do nano degrees. She's in
Yeah.
6th grade. And so she gets to do nano degrees, which is so cool. And I think that is really where we're going, is this badges, nano degrees, micro credentials concept,
Yeah.
instead of just one piece of paper that says you did
Yeah.
27 years of learning.
Yeah, the whole holistic paste paper. It's interesting
Yeah.
because Ananta Garwal, the ex-CEO of edX, was talking about this Lego-like learning, stackable education. And that's one
Mm,
big motivation for me with the modular degrees,
yeah.
a stackable, putting together like Legos kind of thing.
I
And
love that.
one
I've
of,
never heard
yeah,
that. I love that.
yeah,
That's an awesome concept.
you'll have a whole rabbit hole to dig on after this episode. But it's interesting because it makes me think about one of the first videos I ever did on my YouTube channel, for example, was this idea of my credentials. What do these platforms offer? So Coursera has their specializations, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like not a broad way of explaining it, but when you get to like edX with micro bachelors and micro masters, or Udacity, which also has nano degrees, or programs by FutureLearn, they all have their different ways of saying it, but it's just a collection of courses that's a part
Mhm.
of a degree. And
Mhm.
you know what really made me mad, actually, just a little tangent, is on edX, there's a ton of MicroMasters, and I was really enamored by these. I still am. I still want to take them. But there's one school in particular, the University of Queensland, UQX, that had 4. One of it was corporate innovation, one of them sustainable energy, and one of them was, I can't remember off the top of my head now at this point, but basically innovation and sustainability were like some of the main key themes, and those are the areas that I want to work in. And so I was like, okay,
Perfect.
4 different MicroMasters, and maybe I can combine them, make my own degree, something like that. And I thought like maybe I could still do that personally, but I was like, I kind of want to make it official. Like, if I were to get 3 of these MicroMasters, that should equal a degree. Because if
Uh-huh.
what you can do, most of them, is take 1 MicroMasters and get a semester's worth of graduate level education credit towards your degree. And so when you jump into that actual degree, you actually only have 2/3 of it left, so to speak.
Mm.
And what's interesting is that I looked at one of them, and it was like entrepreneurship and innovation. And I was like, okay, cool. One of the little areas, the minors that you would get with that was sustainability and energy. And look at the courses. The courses on a sustainable energy minor was the exact same on the MicroMasters. And so in essence, it would be the same thing. I asked them, like, hey, could I take both these MicroMasters and then go in, just basically finish a couple courses and be done? They're like, oh, no, that's not how it works. And there's still this limitation when it comes to schools, when it comes to like how do they actually use those micro-credentials in an official.
And did they relate that back to accreditation? Was that where, or did they say?
They didn't say that, but that's probably why. I mean, it's usually other excuse most of the time.
Yeah, I've worked with that. That's most definitely the excuse, is saying, is they can't justify that. They can't prove it inside of their education that, or their accreditation that you did that. So then they can't keep their accreditation. It's a whole big sadness thing. So if we get back to the question about can you be a polymath in K-12, like what are your thoughts? Oh, hang on. When the courses are the same, why can't you make a nice sandwich degree out of it? I have so many questions, and probably the answer is accreditation. That's why. Okay.
Well, and they're probably trying to keep them isolated. Maybe the courses were a bit longer. I don't know. But when it comes to polymathy in K-12, I think it is a matter of just letting students indulge in their curiosity, for one. Like, that's first and foremost. Like, you have to make sure the kids are learning what they want to learn, or else you're squandering their potential. And if you try to force someone to learn something they're not interested in, you're just going to retain it temporarily and then spit it out for a test and then forget about it. And here's a big part of that is the idea of, like, most kids don't retain it even too. There's a lot of things I didn't retain, like with mathematics when I was in like sophomore year, that kind of thing, where it's like I didn't care enough about it. I didn't have a reason to.
I don't remember anything about my AP chemistry class. Like,
ironically, when I was in algebra, we did a month of calculus-based stuff. And once I was really interested in it, I was like, okay, this is more conceptual. This is more philosophical in a way. Like, this is more macro for me. This is how my brain works. My grade shot up for that month. And then we went back to algebra, and I wasn't interested anymore, and it went back down. It was interesting how, like, once it interested me, I was able to do it. And I think that's a big thing now, especially in the US, where we're forcing these kids into these herds of classrooms, basically, and turning them into cogs of wheels. There was actually an image I saw where the classroom setup was a range of desks in a square. And then you look at the office boardroom setup or office meeting room setup, and it's the exact same way. Whiteboard on the wall with little markers. And we're training these kids to be working in the corporate environment. But the corporate environment and education system are not built for polymaths. And so I think that when you need to change both in a way to really incorporate these unicorn learners or people who are multidisciplinary or polymathic, whatever term you want to use, really support them in their learning and try to give some way of support that we can.
Definitely. And I think this whole concept of inquiry-based learning is huge, because if you're trying to tell someone what they have to learn, even if they want to learn, I mean, maybe it's just me, maybe it's the rebel in me, but if you're telling me that I have to do that, I'm like,
no.
Do I though? I suddenly am not interested in anything that you're saying. But if you present, I mean, and this is science, right? If you're presented with options, and then you get to choose, you come back and you're more interested in that. I mean, we used to tell, when we were talking with my teachers, when I was training teachers in early education, specifically with birth through 2. So like think walkers through 2 years old. Okay. And we're talking with them about how the brain develops and how it works and rebellion in the brain at a young age and all these kinds of concepts, right? What we would describe as rebellion. And I would always tell the teachers, don't give a choice where a choice is not available. So for example, if you're walking a child back to a class and you're saying, do you want to come back inside and have a snack? And the child says no. And you say, oh, well, sorry, we're having a snack right now. Did you give them a choice? Was that a choice? I don't think so. I think you were just asking a question that wasn't really a question. And instead it should be, would you like to, if you can't get them back into the classroom or whatever, it's, hey, would you like to wash your hands first? Or would you like to have a snack first? That's a real question. And then they get a choice and they get to move forward. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, we're giving a choice, but there's not really a choice. Hey, you can come to school, and would you like to come and learn? Well, or would you like to come in and at least read these textbooks, right? I mean, it's not a question. You don't get to kind of choose what you want to do and what you want to drop and what you're interested in. It's a question that's not really a question.
Well, I remember a choice in my last year of high school where my English teacher, I think he gave us like 3 different choices for books, but none of them interested me. Like I don't remember exactly why, but all 3 of them just seemed completely boring to me.
It's like the
And
question that's not a question. Choice is not a choice.
And it's like all 3 of them just weren't really going to do it for me. And I asked him if I can get a different book. And even though it was kind of breaking his own little rules for it, he managed to make a little exception there and let me get a book that I actually enjoy.
Yeah.
And I was able to do that project much more effectively. And
Yeah.
I think that's what teachers can do too. Maybe if we can't change things dramatically just yet, the small things like that, if teachers can do more of those things, actually help encourage the kids to learn what they want to learn, I think it's interesting to do.
I think that's definitely the more choice, autonomy that we can give to the learner, the better that we can do. I mean, so the school that I talk about it all the time, but the school that my daughter is at, Galileo, is the closest that I could find of what I would create if I were to create a school, right? And when she starts the beginning of her month, they have facilitators and learners. They don't have teachers and students. So once a day they have a check-in, and the facilitator and all the students, her cohort, they come together and they present, here's what I'm doing today, here's my goals. They play a game. And those types of things, just kind of to engage them. And then they pretty much just spit them out back into their day. And they use a platform where everybody kind of goes in and out of their clubs. They have facilitator-led clubs and student-led clubs and nano degree stuff and all those types of things. And at the beginning of the month, she's responsible for building out her month. She has to set her goals. She has to reflect upon last month. She has to choose her clubs for the month, her nano degree for the month, and a couple other things, and build it all out. And then she has to create and print out her schedule, and then follows her schedule throughout the day. And she may have a 2-hour break. She may have a 10-minute break, right? It just depends on how it goes. But she is essentially completely autonomous in getting that done. And if she doesn't like a club, she finishes it and drops it and switches to another one. And so we've seen such dramatic increase. I mean, she was already a high achieving learner. She was in GT when she was in traditional schooling and all those types of things, right? But she is thriving in this concept of she's a control freak. I don't know where she gets it from, but it's a thing. She is thriving. Hey, Matt, she is thriving in this. I get to build and do my own day. And now she's doing harder subjects and harder concepts with higher grade level kids than she would have done had I said, hey, we need to do this, this, and this. And so she's going so much further on her own in this setting of autonomy than she would have gone had I built the schedule for her. And I think we can't create in public education that specific thing. I see you, Salty. Stop calling me names. Control freak. Control.
I think he's calling me control freak.
Yes, I like to agree that Dustin can be a control freak. He admitted it. It's fine. But I think in education, I got distracted.
In education, autonomy.
We were talking about autonomy, and we can't give them complete autonomy inside of our system as it stands now, right? But we can give them more choice. Like you were saying, we can do small things to say, okay, you don't really like any of these books. What are your suggestions for things we can do, and see what we can fit inside of what we have to get approved or funded or whatever. I just think the more choice that we can give, the more we can encourage this concept of multidisciplinary. And really, honestly, the more we can encourage this, the quality of learning that's happening inside the classroom.
Yeah, that was one of the motivations behind what I'm doing with my endeavor too, is where like I had a lot of interests I wanted to pursue, and there was no way for me to do that in a traditional sense. Like if I went to college, I'd have to have multiple degrees in order to do that.
Yeah, and that sounds really expensive.
Yeah, if anything, like I also don't think I would have been able to make it through that, because I did do a stint, a year or so in a college. And the thing was, the reason why I did it is because it was free. It was a new school, and so they offered it for free to get more people in there to get accreditation. The idea was, though, the school itself was built on a lot of neuroscience of learning and trying to make sure that all the different aspects of like maybe getting ideas of competency or mastery in there. And they did a really good job in incorporating neuroscience, but it was so slow to the point where I couldn't stay there. Like I had to play Tetris while I was listening in order to just keep my engagement focus. And it's just one of those things where they did really well at taking the science behind it and making sure it worked really well. They even made their own visual platform. This is before Zoom school, basically, too. And the Forge platform allowed for teachers to put a video right there, all the students beneath there, a chat on the side, the slides right there to the left. It was very well made when it comes to actually like, hey, I need to see all these different information for my class. Great. But there was a level of pacing, and that's why I had to leave. Like I couldn't stay there anymore because of the pacing. And Whereas I was looking at WGU, which is a self-paced kind of degree where you literally can go
Mm-hmm.
in there and go as fast as you want. Someone got
Yeah.
their degree done in 3 months, a
Yeah.
bachelor's degree in 3 months, because they were able to just burn through it all because they're fast.
I mean, that's how I did high school. I got
Mhm.
bored out of my mind, convinced my mom to not make me do it anymore, bought all the curriculum and finished on my own,
Mhm.
and then moved to Honduras because it was just so slow.
Yeah.
Like, please don't make me do this anymore. I cannot exist inside of this terrible structure.
Yeah.
It was awful, but yeah, I mean, I love the concept of self-paced. So I want to hear, before we finish, I want to hear about, you keep talking about this modular degree, and I'd love if you shared some about it because I love this project that you kind of have happening.
So it's interesting because what I wanted to do was work in smart city development. For me, I wanted to find a degree for that. And at the time, there was no degree. So I decided, screw it, I'm going to create my own, this do-it-yourself education, so
I
to
like
speak.
this plan.
Yeah, I mean, you did the same thing for high school, literally. And I looked at some people who did it in the past. There was Scott Young, the author of Ultra Learning, who did his MIT challenge, where he did a 4-year MIT degree in like 1 year. There was Jonathan Haber, who did a philosophy-based one. Laurie Picard, who did no pay MBA. All these different areas were very focused on niches and like specialties. I thought, what if we made a system that was divergent? Like you can choose whatever you want to do. And for people who are more like me and you, who are polymathic or multidisciplinary, we have choice. We don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
structured to this one niche. And I thought, okay, that's cool. I started collecting courses, and I was focused on MOOCs, like I said earlier. Like it was so narrow focus on that one content type, and I realized that like, okay, I collected over 450 courses. That's not going to work out for me there. Even if I did one course a day, it's still going to take almost 2 years.
Yeah, you have a while.
Yeah. And so I cut it down to fat, and I realized, okay, cool, courses are great, but I also need to include books and articles and podcasts and audiobooks. I started realizing, okay, this system's really filling out, so to speak. Let's
Mm-hmm.
create a tool, or at least a minimal version of the tool, MVP, to organize all the information, try to order it into semesters or whatever kind of terminology you want for it. Semesters and degree is what I use as a kind of translation tool for people to understand what it kind of is like, but it's really not a degree. It's not a college. It's not anything like that. It's more of a tool to help you organize and change the way we approach online learning in general.
I mean, we've talked about it. I've seen
Mhm.
like little bits of it, and I love the concept because it is truly modular, I think, and it's hard to find that anywhere else. And a lot of it falls under accreditation and funding, which are like, just going to take a couple of those things on one at a time.
Yeah,
Surely
I
it'll
can
be
show
fun.
a template real quick.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So the idea, let me see, something to share. Can you see it?
There we go.
All right. So the idea here, you have a big master database, and this is just the MVP. It's not really going to be like this, I think, in the future when I build it more of an app. You have a choice here. You have different types of learning, content types, podcasts, audiobooks, courses. For mine, it was a big, long list of courses, but I started expanding it out when I started doing other things. And the idea here, you have a big master list. You can see it all there. Underneath that, you have your semesters that you can make out. So for me, the first semester started my mod degree, that kind of thing. For me, actually, my own one was global business. The next one was sustainability and marketing and philosophy and that kind of thing. You can choose what you're going to be grouping it as. You can also make this as different skill trees or whatever kind of way you want to organize it. You can change the names as much as you want. Then down here, you have the actual small list of items where these are all the articles you want to write about or learn about, all the courses, all the books, and that way, there's a level of distinction between the different content types too. But another cool thing is you can copy the semesters one here, and let's say you want to make it all categories. So you want everything based on education. So you make a semester on education, you click that, and everything that's underneath that semester will show up here in that particular database. So if I want to look at that article, it's right there. I can pull it for all education or all of the first semester things. And I think that's a very interesting way of grouping and easily accessing all the different tools. We talked about output later too, and what's interesting too is that you can do this capstone kind of based thing, which is a way of doing a project at the end of your semester. It's a culmination of all the different things you're doing together. And just to kind of slow down my speech here, because I'm starting to talk like a stockfield. There's this
It's
idea.
okay. I talk that fast too, so it's fine.
Yeah, note taking. So Cornell notes are still interesting, but there are other ways of doing note taking, such as a Feynman technique, that kind of thing. There's a template on here. Every piece of item you add in there, you can have this template. What did I learn? What are the keywords? Why is this important? So the why, how, what of Simon Sinek starts with why. I put that in there. You can take notes. And I think this idea is interesting too, because then you can really start that middle ground we mentioned earlier. So the input is you learning, reading, and you take your notes and start putting the middle ground in there, start getting the thoughts kind of settled in your brain. And eventually you make some sort of output, such as a blog post or a video or whatever kind of thing you want to do, bullet journaling. And eventually you have an input, slow burner, and output, just like the second brain or pair method when it comes to productivity. But you have it in education. And I hope to build this out as a platform too, where you can actually collect courses and books through that platform.
I love that. I think it's just fantastic because we can talk about all the things that need to be changed inside of education all day, but unless we actually do something, we're adding to the problem. And so I love that not only are you saying, here's the things that I didn't like about education, or here's what I really see as a struggle, you're then complementing that with, and here's my proposed solution or remedy or supplement to what we're already doing to help us continue to move forward in education. I love that. I think that's awesome.
Well, and the last time we spoke, which was about a week and a half ago or something like that, I was working on this template, but I just finally got it really production ready for people to use. And I think that's, like, in a more bigger sense at least, I think that you're the first show I had it on too. So you're the first person to see it.
Oh my gosh. We were the ones who learned about your paper situation, and we got to see the mod degree platform first.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
And I think it's interesting too, because when you can start doing more on the app. So we talked about information architecture. How do we take so many person to show exactly something? And it's interesting because there's a lot of different aspects to how we collect information, how we start to remember things, going back to it. So the idea of competency or spaced repetition and really bringing things back to the fold and remembering things more deeply, going back to this idea of, okay, this is the concept I learned, this is how I thought about it, and remembering that a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, and really trying to expand it out. And so with Notion, I'm able to try to do that spaced repetition, or even with the tool itself that I'm trying to build, make interleaving possible. So taking one knowledge and weaving it into the other one, that kind of thing. I think that's a very important thing for multidisciplinary people too, is to start building that transcontextual thinking and bridging together the interdisciplinary thinking, however you want to approach it. So
I love that. Solti says, I have to learn how to not lose my train of thought. He said Justin, but I feel like he meant Dustin, so it's fine. It's pretty much the same word. It's okay.
Well, and some people actually, one of my students referred to me as a stock reel of information when I taught, and I'm kind of getting in that teaching mode now too, so it's kind of interesting how that's similar.
It's true. I'm always learning all kinds of things. So I think I've loved the conversation. I love that. I mean, honestly, most of the conversations that I have with all these different pieces of, yesterday we talked about AI with Alfonso, and today we're talking about polymathy in education. We've talked about relationships in education. We've talked about all kinds of different things on the show, and it always kind of comes back to the same thing. Every learner learns different. Everything needs to start from a basis of relationship and follow the learner.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simple, right? That's all we need to do. I don't see the problem. I feel like.
Well, and one more thing I want to mention is this idea of why, how, what. And something that kind of came together when you were speaking is this idea of AI. In the future, like right now, it's self-curated. All these different courses and books and things you're putting in there are stuff that you choose to put in there. But eventually, maybe there could be an AI that says, okay, you like this in this category? Well, you can be suggested that particular material in a different sense, like Netflix does for different shows. Yeah. I've actually looked at the Netflix model. Like I started studying the Netflix model of doing things to see if I can try to find a way to replicate it. But eventually too, that's the how. Like, okay, this is how you go about it. What about the why? And so this idea of digital mentors helping you understand why you should go down that path that the AI says. So kind of like a translation between the technical and make it more personable, so to speak.
Yeah. I love that, because I think we can always automate, really cool things in the back end, but if we're losing the personable level, then we're missing one of the most important things, which is relationship. I mean, according to me, which obviously I'm correct.
It's totally right. Yeah.
So it's right. So we know that the most important thing is relationship. Otherwise, everything else is just stupid.
Yeah.
And that's our show. So thank you so much, Dustin, for coming on and hanging out and sharing this really cool stuff. And now everyone knows what a polymathy is, which is really fantastic. And let's see, hang on, Solti said something about Netflix. An algorithm similar to Netflix and an education app would be fantastic, recommending each individual things they might be interested based on what they've already learned. That is, I like that. Let's just do that. Let's just call Netflix and be like, look, guys, look,
Yeah.
we have this thing that we need to fix. It's called education, and we have a plan. So all we need you to do is just say yes. Okay, ready, set, go.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because there's a lot of things that you can pull together, and I think the polymathic approach is taking everything in different bits and pieces and pulling it together into a new innovation. And so being able to pull from Netflix, pull from gaming, pull from whatever kind of area we know that works in some shape or form, and put it into education.
Totally. There's so many things that are highly applicable. That's a different rabbit trail. So
Yeah.
before we go down 27 more, we're just going to call it good. And
Yes.
next time we'll go down some really other fun rabbit trails because there's so many. And you and I always end up on really fun ones. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. And I hope you have a great weekend. If you're in Texas, I hope that you're warm and you have power and water. We have power and water. However, we have to boil our water. So if you are looking to find Dustin, you can find him
at polyinnovator.space, so you can learn more about the modular degree there, or you can find me on basically any platform at Polyinnovator.
Because you just follow him. He looks for the red guy.
Yeah. You were teasing me about that last week.
I was just trying to use the thing and it was bright red. Anyway, that's a different problem. All right, y'all, we're going to let you go. So we'll see you next time.
Pandora.